Good morning, everybody. If you are live with us, thank you for being here. If you're joining and listening after the fact, we appreciate you as well. Couple things, housekeeping things before we get started. You'll notice there's a chat box over there. When you use Google Hangouts, the chat box can be open if you're broadcasting your video. But if you do a screen share, which is what I'm going to do with my PowerPoint, the chat box may disappear. So hang in there. I'll come back to the chat area intermittently as we go through the presentation to see if you have any comments or questions. So do use the chat box for comments and questions. As with any technology, sometimes things go haywire. We know that. So we'll come back and make things right. Now, everybody that's registered for this will receive a link both to the recorded session as well as to the PowerPoint slides that I will be sending later today. So with that, we are right at 11 o'clock. So I'm going to turn this over to a screen share, which again, the chat box will go away for me, but I will check back in intermittently. Okay, so now you should all be seeing on your screen the Gender 101, Shedding Light on Gender Spectrum, and my name's Shelley Roth. I'm thrilled that you're here with me today. This is one of my newer courses, and I've been out teaching on gender diversity, gender spectrum, and also helping companies with policy and making sure that everybody feels included. Now, most of you know me as a social media trainer and consultant, which I've been doing since 2006. I'm also a constant contact email marketing solution provider, have been doing that for about 5 years. But the newest thing I added back in 2017 when my 4th book came out, Don't Call Me Ma'am, was gender diversity and inclusion training. I am a transgender person. I'll tell you my story and share it with you today. And feel free to ask any questions that you may have. And I'm always here to be an ear and listen to you after the fact. You are always open to call me or email me and talk further. Now, with this new coursework, of course, all the profits that I get from speaking on gender, as well as my book sales on my Don't Call Me Ma'am book, go to a local charity here in Houston, a nonprofit, glbthomeless.org. Happy to report we've raised several $1,000s for them so far and want to keep doing that. And as we go through the presentation, you'll understand a little bit more why. Now, the easiest way to find me is at ShelleyRoth.com. That's Shelley with an EY. When you go there, you'll see all these little images. If you click on any of those, it'll take you to my Facebook business page where you can ask social media questions. You'll also see my events calendar. You can check out my books. And if you want to join my private diversity Facebook group, you can do that right there and sign up for my gender advocacy newsletter right there. Okay, so that's the easiest way to check me out. Now, the mission at Springboard is in line with an organization called Center for Global Inclusion. Back in 2017, I worked with them and got permission and authorized by them. And so the mission is pretty simple: to create a better world, to contribute to a greater good for society and a world that's fair and just and respectful of everybody, all individuals with both their similarities and differences. And of course, with that, to help improve companies' communication and performance, because when an environment is inclusive, needless to say, people perform better. So sustaining an environment that treats all people fairly. And of course, a third part of my mission is to raise awareness and money for LGBTQ homeless youth. Today, we are going to go through some basic definitions, as well as talk about what is the gender spectrum and what does that mean. I will share my story coming out as a transgender person, and we'll talk about gender neutral pronouns, which become very important when being respectful of folks out there. I will give you some policy suggestions for your organization. We'll have a Q&A at the end, and there is a resources section that you'll be able to access when you receive the PowerPoint slides from me, as long as you're registered and I have your email address. So let's start with some basic definitions. Now, gender has come a long way as far as conversations out there. Just over 10 years ago, Newsweek had a cover called The Mystery of Gender, where at the time was pretty revolutionary, and people were starting to question about what is gender and transgender, and shedding light on the, as they called it, riddle of gender. Fast forward, well, in this case, they were discussing, is it more than just physical details? History and science suggests that gender is much more complicated than biological birth. Well, fast forward another 17 years, and National Geographic came out with their issue, Gender Revolution. Katie Couric even did this TV special. So if you can access this on demand, you can search for Gender Revolution, and you can find Katie Couric's TV special that she did last year. It takes a deep dive into what gender identity is, and the whole issue of National Geographic is dedicated to gender. So we've come a long way, needless to say, but we have a much longer way to go. Now, a couple things that came out back in 2007, of course, people were starting to question, is gender identity separate from sexual orientation, and is it different than biological birth identity, what we are born? Historically, in the United States, gender has been on the binary. It's male or female, black and white, one or the other based on what we see. We've come a long way with National Geographic's issue, but we do have a long way to go, needless to say. Now, the definition of gender is the state of being male or female, typically used to reference social and cultural differences rather than biological ones. So it could be said that gender is made up, if you will, by society. We'll talk more about that as we go. Now, basic definitions, when we think of sex, we think of biological sex as something that is assigned at birth based on the anatomy that the baby has. Gender identity is something that is assumed and assigned at birth based on the biological sex. However, a person's gender identity may not always match their assigned biological sex. Gender identity can be on a spectrum. It can be expansive or non-binary. So when we think of binary, we think of black and white, or one or the other, or male or female. But gender can be on a spectrum. It can be expansive. Now, sexual orientation is your sexual preference and typically is confirmed in adolescence. We'll go into a little bit more depth on these definitions. And the last thing we'll cover is gender expression. This is how you present yourself. We'll cover that in a little bit more detail. So I'm hoping before you leave here, you'll be much clearer on this. Now, in a black and white world, biological sex would match gender identity. What I mean by that is a biological female, gender identity is woman, and a biological male, gender identity is man. When that occurs, the term for that is cisgender. So a cisgender woman is born biologically a female, and her gender identity is woman. Now, that's not to say that their gender expression could be feminine or masculine, depending on what's happening. So a cisgender woman can be out riding a horse or out bird watching, and their gender expression might be on a spectrum. It might be more masculine than feminine. So know that gender expression is fluid as well. So again, born biologically female, born biologically male, identify gender as your biological birth sex, woman or man, you are a cisgender person. And you'll see links in the presentation as we go through that you can access to learn more or read more. Now, gender expression is how you present. It could be your mannerisms, your speech pattern, your dress, your hairstyle, and as I mentioned, it can be on a spectrum as well. This is a screenshot of Elle Fanning from the movie 3 Generations, and if you haven't watched it, it is on demand and you can find it out there. It's a really good movie. Susan Sarandon plays her mother, and Elle Fanning plays a transgender male. And as you can see, gender expression, we could pretty much say is male. Tassel cap, t-shirt, flannel shirt, pretty much male gender expression. Now, gender is on a spectrum. Gender is fluid. It can be non-binary. It doesn't have to just be two. We are born biologically in a male or female body. In most cases, there are intersex folks. We're not going to drill too deep on that because this is a 101. We're going to stay pretty high level. But biologically, generally speaking, you're born in a male or female body with male or female anatomy, yet gender is on a spectrum. Now, millennials do not want to be defined as male or female gender. As a matter of fact, a survey of 1,000 millennials found that half of them think gender is on a spectrum. I mean, that is just mind-blowing to me, keeping in mind that millennials, as you can see, make up the largest segment of the population. Almost 87 million in the United States born between 1980 and 2000 are millennials, with baby boomers coming in second and Gen X third. So over half of the millennials think that gender is on a spectrum. Very, very interesting. And the times they are a-changing, as we'll talk about. Now, gender identity is something that usually comes into play when a child is 3 or 4 years old and they're starting to question their bodies and their anatomies. As I speak through this presentation today, obviously I am trans. I was born in a female body, but my gender identity is male. So as I talk through this, I can relate to all of it. A cisgender person identifies their gender with their biological sex assigned at birth. So smooth sailing there. Transgender people like myself do not. They identify opposite of their birth sex. And then, of course, there's everything in between on the gender spectrum. So those folks that are gender expansive, there are some people that don't even want to be associated with male or female gender. They're on the spectrum. Or they can say they're non-binary. So if we use old Barbie and Ken as an example, we can assume that Barbie and Ken, their biological birthday suits, they have male anatomy or female anatomy. We also can assume that their gender identity is binary. Their gender identity is male and female. So they are cisgender in the world of Toyland, versus being on the gender spectrum or non-fluid or non-binary or fluid or gender expansive. Their sexual orientation, I guess, of course, I'm not making these assumptions. I would say they're probably heterosexual, but sexual orientation is heterosexual, gay or lesbian, bisexual or asexual. They, Barbie and Ken, most likely are heterosexual. And their gender expression, pretty much their hair and clothing and physical expression and mannerisms match their biological and their gender identity. Although those shoes on Ken, I'm not sure. We could say Ken could be on the gender expression spectrum because those look a little bit more on the spectrum versus more masculine. So just definitions through toy manufacturers' eyes. Now, the definition of a transgender person like myself, it's people whose gender identity differs from the sex assigned at birth. So I was born biologically a female with female anatomy, but my gender identity is male. My friend and colleague, Megan, was born biologically a male and gender identity is female. Now, some transgender folks, certainly not the majority, have gender affirmation surgery so that their physical body matches their gender identity. Now, I want to be very, very clear on this. Having affirmation surgery does not give you the definition of what a transgender person is. Surgery is expensive. Surgery can be dangerous. Surgery can be painful. We know this about surgery. So don't think that you have to have a transgender person has to have surgery to be any more of a transgender person than someone like myself that has not had gender affirmation surgery. That's a personal choice that people make. If you want to read more when you get the slides about Megan, I have a link in there that you can do that. Now, across different cultures, there have been third genders. Native Americans had a third gender called two-spirits. Basically, it's a gender fluid or non-binary or gender expansive. It's people whose gender identity and gender expression is different from what society expects for the binary or male or female. Many other cultures recognize more than two genders. We have the Samoa folks. Third gender is called the Fa'afin, a gender other than boy or girl. South Asia has a term for third gender, as well as Nigeria, Mexico, Thailand, Tonga, and even in the United States and Hawaii, the Mahui people. I have a video here that you can watch about the Mahui people of Hawaii. So we have more than two genders across many different cultures and always have had that. In the United States, of course, there's been a lot of mainstream exposure. I bet everybody has heard of Caitlyn Jenner, formerly Bruce Jenner, Laverne Cox on Orange is the New Black, the series on Netflix. Transparent series, if you haven't watched this is Jeffrey Tabor plays a transgender woman, actually won an Emmy for his role. And it's on the Amazon Prime channel, so you can find it there. A brand new series that got a lot of exposure this year called Pose on the FX channel. And then, of course, our National Geographic issue, which was just an amazing issue on gender revolution, which we talked about, and the Katie Couric special on the Nat Geo channel that you can find on demand. So lots of mainstream exposure out there for transgender and gender spectrum, and I'm happy to report that. Now, on the Katie Couric special, the question became, could gender be something that's biological? And over the last couple years, scientists are intrigued by the possibility that something happens in the womb that impacts gender identity. Is it possible that some signals are sent to the brain and one set of instructions goes to the brain and another goes to the anatomy? We can be sure of one thing, that if there is a conflict in the anatomy and in the brain is always going to override and win. This is a screenshot from the 2020 special. We can see the baby is in utero and the signals to the brain are signaling male, but the signals to the anatomy are signaling female. So this is an intriguing possibility that maybe something does happen biologically. So we're going to do an activity here that's pretty simple. I'd like you to take a piece of paper and a pen, and I want you to either draw a face or a flower, something very easy, or a house, or just write something down, your address or your profession or your favorite food, favorite color. Let's take a few seconds to do that. And then we'll get out of the screen sharing mode, because unfortunately in Google Hangouts, I can't see your comments unless I get out of screen share. So sometimes there's some technical difficulty doing that, but we'll see what happens when we jump back in and out. All right, so hopefully you've done that. Now what I want you to do is I want you to now draw the same exact thing, write or draw the same exact thing, but I want you to use your non-dominant hand. Righties, I want you to use your left hand, and left-handed folks, I want you to use your right hand. Go ahead and draw or write the same thing that you just did with your dominant hand. Okay. Now, I want you to describe, how did that feel to try and draw or write with your non-dominant hand? And I want you to describe that resulting picture or text. Give me a couple words or a phrase. You can put it in the chat section to describe how that felt to try and draw or write with your non-dominant hand. What words describe how that felt? Some of the words, and we're going to go check out and see if anybody is participating in this exercise. Some words that I've heard in live classes and webinars I've done is, it was difficult, it felt unnatural, it felt unbalanced, it felt funny, it felt strange, it felt awkward. So before I jump out of this, where this little exercise came from, or what it was based on, is a woman that I know, a transgender woman, Hannah Simpson. She compares being transgender to handedness. So I'll read you this, but you'll get it when you get the presentation. She says, how do you know you're right-handed or left-handed? Nobody tells you that. You're not born with a mark on your hand telling people what you are. You just know. When you put something in the wrong hand, you know it feels wrong. It doesn't feel right. That's how gender is. When a trans person's walking around the world in a gender they're not, they know it feels wrong. They just know. And when they live authentically, it's like picking up a pencil in the right hand. It feels good, it feels natural and organic and right. And that's a link to Hannah Simpson's website. So I can attest to what Hannah is saying. Walking around in the wrong gender, or actually the wrong biological sex, is gender dysphoria, and we're going to define that for you here in a minute. But let me pop out. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can pop out of this and see if we have any comments on our Facebook Live in our chat section. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any comments at this time, so I'm going to go ahead back and hopefully we'll screen share. Sometimes there's a hiccup on this, but we'll see. Oh, great, there it is. We'll go back and jump over to where we were in our presentation, which was right there. Okay, so those are some of the things, and I can attest that that's all real, because Gender dysphoria, let me define what that is. Gender dysphoria involves a conflict between a person's physical or assigned gender and the gender with which he, she, or they identify. People with gender dysphoria may be very uncomfortable with the gender they were assigned at birth, sometimes described as being uncomfortable with their body or being uncomfortable with the expected roles of their assigned gender. So I can attest to this. Being born biologically a female, but my gender identity was male, needless to say, I was conflicted all of my life until I discovered what I even was. I had no clue what transgender was. So I'm going to share with you my story. And by the way, there's a link to more information if you want to learn more about gender dysphoria. So with that, I will launch into my story. And why am I sharing my story now? Well, all of my life, as I struggled with gender dysphoria, I suppressed my gender identity. I didn't realize, even at the time, what was wrong here. I lived a lie, and needless to say, it left me feeling frustrated, angry, like I wasn't part of anything, like I didn't belong, like there was something wrong with me. And let me tell you, folks, that is not a good place to be growing up. Honestly, I feel 6'2" with a buff male body. But when I look in the mirror, of course, I see my female body staring back at me. And even in my daily interactions, I'm always reminded and brought back to, quote, reality, that that's what people see is a female body. And, honestly, that's most likely folks like myself, and I have questioned having gender affirmation surgery because it would be so much easier to not be misgendered out there in the world. But that's something that I've chosen not to do, and we'll talk more about that. Now, I love this picture from Jim Tweedy. It's called Self-Portrait, and we can see the beagle looking in the mirror, and what the beagle sees inside himself or herself is a German Shepherd dog. So it's kind of like when I look in the mirror, what I really feel inside is a male, but what's staring back at me is the female. So I love that example. Now, what most people have assumed all of my life when they see me is, of course, when I was younger, I was always labeled a tomboy. As I got older, and even to this day, people look at me and assume I'm a lesbian because my gender expression leans to male, how I wear my hair, how I dress. And then, of course, people look at my body and assume that I'm a female because I do have female anatomy. But sometimes what you see is not what's real for that person. Thank you to Snapchat, I was able to use a filter and have a goatee and a scruffy beard. And boy, I'll tell you what, when I used that filter, I couldn't have been happier. If it was just that easy to transition and have facial hair, I would do it tomorrow. But just keep in mind, what you see might not be real. I happen to be a transgender person. I was born in a biological body that didn't match my gender identity. You'll see these pictures of me, and to even make matters worse, my mom always put bows in my hair and put me in dresses and skirts, and I couldn't have been more uncomfortable in that role. I was very challenged mentally, very uncomfortable physically. And as I became more aware of this conflict in what my mind thought and what my body said, I became an extreme introvert. I was very unhappy and very angry growing up. My parents even called me a miserable soul. And let me tell you something, they absolutely were right. I was a very, very miserable soul growing up because of this gender dysphoria and conflict in myself. Now, as I got older, you can see my mom was still giving me the bows, and there was my best friend Sally blow up slips. The closest I got to a crew cut, these are my two brothers, Alan and Normie, was this pixie that my mom gave me, but I'm still in the old puffed up skirts and slips. But honestly, I became painfully shy. I rarely talked. I had zero confidence, and I had it made up that I was stupid because obviously something was wrong with me. I was unhappy and I was angry. I was born in a physical body that I just could not relate to or identify with. Yep, that is me. And to top things off, I was given this killer body and this long silky hair, and really all I wanted was a crew cut and a male physique. Now I want you to notice as I show you these pictures, my hair, one of the reasons I grew it long, that I realized probably later in life, was to cover my breasts because I absolutely despised them. They just didn't feel a part of me. At the time, I had no idea what a transgender person was. I mean, at the time when I was growing up and in my teenage years, rarely were lesbians and gay folks talked about from sexuality, let alone transgender. So there I am with my boyfriend at the time. So what was a very unhappy, good-looking girl to do? Well, get engaged to a handsome dude, of course. And Miss Roth was betrothed. That was an article in the Squirrel Hill News in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from. And there's my hair again covering up my breasts. That was just a theme through my life. So yes, I got engaged. I was playing the role. I became a very good actor. But the bottom line was, anytime I had an opportunity to feel like the dude I was inside, I did. Now, this little moped in Mexico, I can't tell you how I remember that. It was like I was on a Harley Davidson. This picture, and still to this day, any chance I have to be 10 inches taller by standing on a rock or standing on my tiptoes, I do stand on my tiptoes because I feel 10 inches taller. And then, of course, one of my favorite pictures, because I look very flat-chested, is my Michael Landon picture. If anybody remembers Michael Landon, my hair was short and felt like Michael Landon in that picture. Halloween, of course, is my favorite holiday because I get to dress as boy characters, even silly boy characters like Alfalfa, if you remember Alfalfa, or Biker Dude, or one of my favorite Halloween characters was always the tough guy with the tattoos. And I always had German Shepherd dogs because that was an outward reflection of the tough guy that I felt inside. But the bottom line is, how and when did I know I was transgender? Well, first I became a great, and I mean great, actor. As a teenager, I had to act straight. This body that I had, I did not relate to, so I had to act like a heterosexual female. Now in college and as a young adult, well, I thought I might be a lesbian, so I was acting like a lesbian. Still as a female, if you will, because I did not know what a transgender was at this stage. But something happened at age 44. I was watching a Lifetime channel program, and sure enough, the light bulb went off. The fireworks exploded because the program was all about transgender people. And I finally, after 44 years of being on the earth, knew what I was. Think about that. Age 44, finally knowing why I hated my body, why I was uncomfortable, why I felt less than all of my life. Now, after that time and learning who I was, embracing who I was very affirming for me. As a matter of fact, I wrote the book, Don't Call Me Ma'am, my story as a transgender person. I published that in 2017. It is on Amazon. So it was very affirming. But when I shared this with others, with my friends and with my family, well, guess what? I was minimized. I was questioned. I was told this was a stage. So I went back into the transgender closet and closed my mouth for the next 20 years. Well, 20 years later, fast forward to the year 2017, last year, I wrote my fourth book, came out as a transgender person, and now I just am who I am, and I share it with whoever wants to hear it. And the reason is it's not about me. I realize that I have these gifts for teaching and educating, and I'm a business person. So with all those skills, I am now out raising awareness and money and being an example to others. That's what it's about. It's not about me. I've created gender inclusive environments through speaking and training with companies, bringing understanding and compassion to employee resource groups, companies, organizations, teachers, organizations, parents. Anybody that's customer facing really needs to get educated on gender so that they don't misgender folks. I've also been doing consulting, helping companies create a gender inclusive policy and culture. Another main reason is transgender people are at extremely high risk to be bullied, to be sexually assaulted, or to attempt suicide. The numbers are staggering. According to surveys in the United States, 4.6% of the overall population attempt suicide, whereas in the transgender, gender non-conforming world, 41%. I mean, those numbers are just crazy. So if I can be out there training and making a difference, that's what it's about. If we say that about 1 in 300 identify as transgender, that would be about 1.4 million Americans identify as trans. You can go to my Springboard site and look at my work that I'm doing by clicking on that link when you get the presentation, or of course, much easier to go to ShellyRoth.com and click on my transgender diversity website. It's all about raising awareness and raising money for LGBTQ homeless youth. That's what it's about for me at this stage of my life. So you might ask, well, how can you make a difference, whether you're an ally out there? It's something very simple that both individuals and companies can do, is ask about people's pronouns. This is embedded when you get this presentation. You can watch a video on gender pronoun use. You can email me at sroth@shellyroth.com with any questions or comments. But the bottom line is there's various categories of pronouns. Of course, we all know she and he and they, and then some of the neo pronouns ze and zer and her we will talk about here. But let's start with they and them and their. They and them and their can be used in the singular. I know this will rub a lot of my English majors out there in the wrong way because they're have historically been plural. But in this day and age with gender neutral, you can use they and them as gender neutral pronouns. As a matter of fact, the word they is a non-binary pronoun in the new use is very helpful and useful. The neo-pronouns, the modern personal pronouns that are used by people whose gender lies outside of the binary, outside of male and female, can use the neo-pronouns in place, like ze and zer and ze and her. All of those can be used. They're called neo-pronouns. There's even an International Pronouns Day dedicated to pronouns. That the first annual one was this past October, so the second one will be next October. But you can see there's a Facebook group dedicated to International Pronouns Day, and I'm happy to report that over 60 organizations participated, including my company. We did a webinar that day to support International Pronouns Day. So if you want to learn more, there's a link there that you can follow. I want to give you an example of how you would use, in my case, I choose they, them, their as my pronouns. Shelley presented to a diversity group last week on gender neutral pronouns. Instead of saying she was open, you would say they were open and honest about the difference we can make for a transgender person. Their call to action was to be aware and ask what names and pronouns people prefer. Bring Shelley to tell their story instead of her story to your organization. So just an example of how that would be used. Now, Facebook has been, for the last several years, of course, I do social media training, have been doing that for 12 years. I'm happy to report that if you go into Facebook when you set up your personal page and you go into gender and select custom, you can start typing trans and you'll see transgender come up. You can type gender, you'll see gender fluid come up, cisgender come up. So Facebook is right there with us on this, and even taking it to what pronoun do you prefer. On my personal page on Facebook, I can choose wish them a happy birthday versus she or her. So happy to report Facebook's with on that. Additionally, there was a American Association of Law Libraries had their annual conference in Austin. You can see they had ribbons that people could put on their name tags with she and her, or they and them. Vanderbilt has name tags that have people's pronouns listed on the name tag. I create these bands that people get when they come to my workshops or seminars that say they, them, their, or he or her, or whatever band they choose. And my name tag also has that. In addition, you can be a better ally as well by adding pronouns to your Outlook or Gmail or Yahoo email signature. This is my Outlook signature. All that information's on there, and you can see right after my name, I put my pronouns, they, them, and their. And then on my LinkedIn profile, you'll notice after my name, I have my pronouns, they and them. If this does nothing else, it starts a conversation, and I've had many a person talk to me about that, thank me for doing that and helping them be more of an ally by knowing what pronouns to use. By the way, I know I've been going through and I'm the one doing all this talking, but if you do have any comments or questions, if you're listening live, you can ask them in the chat area. I'll check in with that at the end of the presentation. And if you're listening after the fact, you can always email me. My contact information will be on the slide at the end. It's sroth, S-R-O-T-H, at ShelleyRoth.com. Shelley with an E-Y. Oh, there it is right up there. Shelley with an E-Y. All right. Some other things you can do if you do have a conference coming up, have some name badges there that say, hello, my pronouns are. Those can be bought online. University of Kansas has badges that you can put on in their library for your pronouns. And if you go to Etsy and search for pronouns, you won't believe all the stuff out there that you can get that has pronouns like they, them, and their, etc. So ask somebody, which pronouns do you prefer? It's pretty much as simple as that. One thing I created is the tip card, and that can be found at ShelleyRoth.com. You can download it and put your own name on there. But the tip card is something I created because I'm off to change the world one pronoun at a time. When I am at a restaurant, that's where this started, is I leave this card. It's like the size of a postcard. And it basically says, thanks for your service today. Here's an extra tip. If they misgendered me and called me ma'am, I know that's the polite thing to do and that's what they're trained to do. But I'm trying to educate them that some people don't want to be called ladies or guys or sir or ma'am. to use gender neutral pronouns like they, them, and their, or non-specific alternatives like folks, my friends, you all. Give it a try. And so I've left this, and I've had some servers look at me kind of like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. And I've had other servers thank me profusely. I will have to say that my doctor's offices usually kind of question mark, but at least it gives them an opportunity to learn something. So feel free to download this at shellyroth.com, and you can do your own tip card and put your name on that. Some policy ideas for your organization. Now, I work with companies to help rewrite their policies and handbooks to make sure everybody's included. So I will ask you a question for those that are live. Does your organization have any policies for gender non-conforming workers? And if it's yes, please do put that in the chat section. If it's no, are you considering policies or practices? Or are you clueless? What does that even mean? Because a lot of organizations, this is yet to even be done. All right, we'll come back to that. So some examples of really easy things, and you can review these when you get the presentation. But instead of saying, how may I help you, sir, or ma'am, just stay neutral. Just say, how may I help you? Pretty simple. And some other examples, use terms that people use to describe. Just ask, what name do you want us to call you? What pronouns do you prefer? If you're unsure about a patient's name, just ask. I'd like to be respectful. What pronouns do you prefer? What name do you want us to use? Some other examples, and by the way, if you make a mistake, just apologize. Don't make a big deal about it. It makes me very uncomfortable when I say to somebody, and these are my friends, and they call me she, and I say, my pronouns are they, them, their, please, thank you. And then they profusely apologize. Just don't make it a big deal. Just try harder the next time, because the bottom line is, let me tell you something. It's going to take ongoing training and retraining and practice. This has been imprinted in our minds to assume what we see is what's real for that person. Some other for frontline staff. I mean, to me, Walgreens, CVS, all of these folks, Kroger, all need to be trained on staying neutral with folks, because when you misgender somebody, it's disrespectful. You don't know you're doing it, but it's not a good feeling. I can assure you, as a transgender person, that it makes me feel less than. And as Bob Dylan said, of course, the times they are changing, I'm happy to report. Back in April of last year, Oregon residents legally recognized a third gender. It wasn't male or female or man or woman. There was non-binary status. District of Columbia began offering gender-neutral choice of X on driver's license and ID cards. And just this year, California recognized a third gender with passage of their Bill 179, which helps people of all genders be their authentic selves. And New York is considering a similar bill. I don't know if you noticed this, but Coca-Cola had a commercial during the Super Bowl early this year, and now they're starting to run this commercial again. But the commercial actually used gender-neutral pronouns like ze and zer and them. And when they did this, Twitter went crazy. It just lit up, as you can see these comments by folks in caps. Did y'all see the Coca-Cola commercial? They referred to an LGBT plus person as them. They really acknowledge my pronouns, bro. So just went crazy. You can watch the video. It's included in this when you get it. But I just saw that Coke is running that commercial again. So listen for it. It was very, very encouraging. Even Miss Manners got in on the action. Miss Manners, someone had a question about gender neutral words. And the last time I checked out Miss Manners' publication, there were over 500 comments on this question that Miss Manners got. Now, if you want to keep up to date with information, you can join our Facebook Gender Diversity group by going to ShellyRoth.com and clicking on the Join Gender Diversity Facebook group tile. If you want to sign up for my newsletter that I send out once a month, you can also go to Shelly Roth and click sign up for Gender Advocacy Newsletter. My goal at Springboard Training and Consulting, besides, of course, doing my social media training, is to create gender-inclusive environments for everybody. My coursework, I have 3 courses. I also do custom courses, Gender 101, which is what you're listening to today, Why Language Matters, Creating an Inclusive Environment, and Don't Call Me Ma'am, Living in a World Without Labels, which is based on my book. I also do consulting, helping with policy creation, keeping in mind that all proceeds from my training, consulting, and book sales go to a local organization, glbthomeless.org. If you'd like to donate, please do email me and I will point you in the right direction, sroth@shellyroth.com. And remember, everybody, love is love. Treat others as you want to be treated. For all souls on the earth, love thy neighbor. Most importantly, don't ask questions you wouldn't want asked of you. And again, to find me, ShellyRoth.com, you'll land on this page and you can go access my social media classes coming up through events, LinkedIn and Facebook, January of next year, and Next Gender 101 class. So we are going to take any questions now. We have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to pop out a screen share, see if anybody's here. Now, again, if you're watching this after the fact, which the majority of registrants will usually do, I'm happy to answer your questions. Just shoot me an email at sroth@shellyroth.com. So I'm going to stop my screen share, head back over to Google Hangouts, see if we have any questions or comments. Go ahead. See if anybody wants to ask any questions. And if we don't have any, let me go ahead and give you my contact information here so you'll have it after the fact. My ShellyRoth.com will give you my landing page to access my books, my gender group, my gender website, my Springboard social media website, and of course you can email sroth@shellyroth.com to send me a private email. If you'd like a shoulder to lean on, somebody to talk to, I'm here for you. My goal for the rest of my years on the earth is to shed light and bring awareness on what it means to be gender diverse, transgender, gender spectrum, and help the world become a better, more inclusive place. With that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the broadcast. I will be sending this out to everybody, both the slides, so you can access the resource section. Oh, I didn't show you the resource section, but it is, let me go ahead and do that screen share real quick. In the back of the presentation, you'll see a section called resources, and in that section, you will find lots of good information to access, videos, stories, etc. So I will get that to you later today. And we're going to go ahead. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching after the fact. Any questions, please do get a hold of me. Have a good one. Happy holidays.